Ethics is an integral part of life and leadership because, fundamentally, ethics is about making decisions and taking action. Many leaders want to do the right thing, but sometimes the right thing to do is not clear. While ethics is about action, the study of ethics is the study of what makes an action right or good. From that standpoint, the language and concepts from ethical theory are useful for better understanding the situations that leaders face, so that good choices can be made and justified to stakeholders. The four main traditions within ethical theory are principles, which focus on the action taken; character, which focuses on the agent or actor; consequences, which focus on the outcome of that particular action; and care, which focuses on the relationships impacted by the action. For most people and cultures, none of the four traditions alone provide a complete set of moral considerations by which to live. The world is a morally messy and complex place. Therefore, it is important that leaders become more intentional about examining situations from each of these perspectives, to see how they may reinforce, interact, or conflict with each other. The principles branch of ethical thought focuses on the actions people take and tries to determine whether a given act itself is ethically acceptable. In moral philosophy, the school of thought focused on this aspect of ethics is known as deontology, which maintains there are certain standards of human decency that universally apply to all actions. Deontological principles can arise from a variety of sources, a religious tradition, or entirely from logic. They might emerge from a collaborative process to determine official standards of conduct, or they may simply arise from cultural traditions. Sometimes, these principles and rules are made explicit and codified in some way. Other times, the principles are simply understood and largely implicit. Character ethics, or virtue ethics, focuses specifically on the actor or agent and how various patterns of conduct come to define the type of person or organization we are. A person of good character is someone who has many important virtues or forms of human excellence, while someone with bad character has significant failings or vices. Character is something learned from childhood, from parents, friends, and community. Developing character is not an easy task. We don't become a good person simply by saying the right things. Just as athletes put in countless hours and lots of sweat and effort to excel at their sport, we must work hard to learn and incorporate the attributes that we want to define our character. Integrity is a central aspect of good character. It means wholeness, and that you feel good about who you are and the choices that you make. Ethics also has to do with pursuing and achieving laudable ends or goals. Do our actions create more good than harm? If so, those actions can be defended. If not, then those actions are morally problematic. The phrase, "the end justifies the means," is often used to describe this branch of ethics, known as consequentialism or utilitarianism. Focusing on consequences leads one to focus on the stakeholders in a given context and think about how a given decision will likely affect them. Examples of relevant consequences to an organizational decision and how they might vary by stakeholder include the impact on profitability, the impact on employee wellness or well-being, and new opportunities that might result from the decision. This fourth tradition identifies relationships and the moral imperative to maintain healthy relationships as a key part of organizational life. The ethics of care emerged from the work of scholars such as Carol Gilligan, whose work stood in stark contrast to previous psychologists, who saw abstract reasoning about principles as the height of moral development. According to Gilligan, emotions are a critical part of moral reflection. In her view, all people are inherently social and embedded in relationships, and therefore living well and being a good person involves one's ability to maintain healthy relationships with others, and oneself, through the decisions that we make. So how do we use these ethical frameworks in practice? Consider a scenario where you're entering a negotiation to form a partnership agreement with another company. Your boss pulls you aside and instructs you to hide the existence of a product currently under development to try to gain more favorable terms in the deal. If rumors of the product are brought up in the negotiation, you are directed to lie about its existence. How would the four ethical traditions help navigate this scenario? Looking at the situation based on principles, we would need to ask ourselves, does hiding the truth in this situation actually constitute a lie? And if so, does lying violate any relevant principles, either for ourselves, our firm, or the other stakeholders involved? If the answer is yes, then the action would be deemed morally unacceptable based on principles. Shifting to a character ethics approach, the key questions we would want to answer would be, if I lie in this situation, how will it reflect on me? Will I be branded untrustworthy moving forward? And personally, how important is honesty among the other key character traits I seek to embody? The answers to these questions would help us determine whether to lie in this situation would violate our definition of character and ultimately compromise our personal integrity. When evaluating the situation based on consequences, we would want to consider who the primary stakeholders are that will be affected by our actions and how significantly each will be affected. In this case, lying would potentially result in better terms on the deal for our company. It might provide more jobs or lower prices for our customers. But this would obviously be at the expense of our prospective partner's business. Would lying in this situation impact the ability to make deals with this company or any other companies in the future? Are there any legal consequences to lying in this situation? These potential benefits and harms would need to be weighed against one another to determine if lying can ultimately be justified by consequences. Finally, when evaluating this situation using the ethics of care, our primary focus is the impact our actions would have on the relationships involved. We would want to determine which relationships are most relevant to the situation and how severely each would be strained by our actions. Our boss, expecting us to be a team player? Our stockholders, expecting a higher return on their investment? Our prospective business partner, who will feel burned by our dishonesty? Other people in our industry network who might question our integrity moving forward. We would also want to consider what could potentially be done to protect key relationships and repair any damage done by our decision. Together, the 4 traditions of ethical theory help us to gain a full perspective of what is going on, morally speaking, within our situation. But there are obvious tensions both across traditions as well as within each tradition itself. Unfortunately, this is the reality for many complex moral dilemmas in business, especially when managers face significant incentives or pressures to bend the rules or adopt unsavory practices. Understanding the underlying logic and dynamics of each of the 4 traditions and being able to express issues within each is the core challenge for managers. Using these tools can help us see the complexity of a situation, identify key points of tension, better understand the context from the standpoint of multiple stakeholders, and explain our choices to others, even when we don't agree, allowing us to more intentionally create the world we desire with others.